Welcome to Testimony Tuesday with Pastor Brent Oliver from Delphi First Assembly of God and Kokomo Southview Church. Join in celebrating the goodness of God as we hear the stories of how He touches His people.
Hello and welcome to Testimony Tuesday. This is our opportunity every Tuesday to have a guest with us and share some of the great things that God has done in people's lives. We just want you to know that God is still alive and active today. There's a lot of people in churches and a lot of people who have become religious, but people are rarely seeing the real work of God. And where we have seen this, we want to share it with you to give you hope as well. I'm glad today to have Pastor Greg Carter with us. He is a personal friend of ours for many, many years. And the story of what God did in his life many years ago is fascinating. It's amazing. And it has brought many, many people hope. And so, Pastor Greg, why don't you just begin to share the time that you went through, and cancer was your issue. It's a lot of people's issues today. And when people hear that word, it just scares them to death. Talk to us about your experience.
Oh, well, Brent, it's good to join you today. And I like to phrase it this way. I am a survivor and the world needs to see survivors.
Yeah.
You know, people go through stuff, and one of the greatest means of ministry is to behold or see or to hear the story of a survivor. Mine happens to be cancer. There's people that have survived divorce, child abuse, drug addiction.
Yeah.
A survivor can speak greatly into the lives of those people who are struggling with the same issues. And for me, 1996, 25 years ago, in fact, 25 years ago in January, I was diagnosed with cancer. Make a long story short, I didn't think it was all that big a deal. It turned into a bigger deal. I went to the IU Medical Center in January of 1996 to have what was called a radical cystectomy. They were going to remove my bladder because that's where the cancer was, my prostate. And I was going to have a procedure done where they made a new internal reservoir out of a section of my colon. I thought that was bad, that I was going to have to do that. But when the doctors performed the surgery, I had so much cancer in my pelvic area, 18 positive lymph nodes, that they determined that I would not live long enough to justify the surgery. So they aborted the surgery, put a urostomy bag on my side. And in talking with my oncologist and my surgeon at that particular time, they told me that my life expectancy was in the months. In fact, just wanting to know, I talked to my surgeon, and I asked him, I said, if you're laying where I'm laying and you knew what you know, what would you do? Would you take chemo? Would you do this? Would you do that, or whatever? And so he got real blunt with me. He said, well, Greg, if you really want to know the truth, he said, this is January. I've never had a patient live longer than 11 months with 18 grossly positive lymph nodes. And so the truth is, you won't see this Christmas. You need to go home and enjoy what quality of life you have left. And so that's how I left the hospital, Brent. Yeah. That was in January of 1996.
Wow. You go home, you're pastoring a church, you hear that news, your family, your church. Now what?
Well, now what? Now what? I had a great supportive church, but I'm telling you, I battled initially a lot of depression, a lot of discouragement, a lot of fear, voices that just told me it was all over with. It was all, there was no reason to even try to even get up off the couch or to do anything. Mm-hmm. And there's something about 3 o'clock in the morning. I would wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning with this just horrible despair, that was hanging over me. Mm-hmm. But somewhere in the midst of all this, I had to make a determination. If I've only got 11 months left, I am going to have a quality of life, and I cannot live under this fear. I cannot live under this dread. Yeah. So I began to cry out to God for the Lord to help me. And it was a progressive work where God helped me literally through a renewing of my mind and through a renewing of my spiritual life. Just to give you an example, I figured this out. If the devil was going to wake me up at 3 o'clock in the morning, I'm not going to sit here and be afraid. I'm going to pray. And so I was amazed how the fear began to dissipate, because every time I would wake up, instead of sitting there in fear, I'd get up and I'd begin to pray. And I just began to ask God to move on my behalf. And so the torment and the fear began to lift, because I began to realize that our minds determine almost every aspect and every action. There has to be a constant renewal of the mind. We're not to be conformed to this world, but be transformed to the renewing of the mind. Only after the mind has been renewed can we know and understand the will of God. And so I begin to understand. I say this to every person that's struggling with cancer: you've got to get control of your head. You've got to get control of your mind. You cannot let your mind run wild. You know, I live out here in the sticks, and if I go up to the Highway 11 here where I live on, if I turn right, I'm going to go to Elizabeth. It's 4 miles up the road. I don't care what kind of car I'm in, what kind of vehicle I'm in. That road is going to lead me to Elizabeth. And I begin to figure out that if I continue to think these thoughts, these thoughts always lead me to depression. They always lead me to discouragement. They always lead me to fear 100% of the time. So I cannot get on that road. And I had to learn, Brent, to take every thought captive to the obedience of Christ. They're like a bug zapper. I mean, when that thought came, I'm not going there. I'm not going there. And so one of the first things that I had to overcome in my life was to realize that my mind is going to overwhelm my spirit if I don't get control of my thought processes. And so that was the first phase. Spiritually, I just made a determination that I didn't care how I felt. I didn't care what was going on. I was going to pray and I was going to seek God. So literally every night for about 6 months, I came to the church and I prayed and I cried out to God. And the more I cried out, every time I would go, it'd be worse. I thought it was bad. You know, I would have these times where I would believe God. I think I'd have great faith, and I would go have a test ran, and the tumors were bigger. In fact, I ended up being a part of a clinical trial. Didn't want to do it. You know, my wife wanted me to do it, and so I was a part of a clinical trial. And so I did take some rounds of chemo, but, you know, they weren't doing anything. So it's kind of hard to put 14 months of your life into a 10-minute segment, you know, as we're doing here today. But can I be Pentecostal a little bit, Brent? Is that okay?
Sure.
Okay, well, all right. Because one of the greatest revelations that I received through this whole time was this. Okay. When I was raised Baptist, went to the Church of Christ Seminary. So, I mean, I don't have the Assemblies of God banner that I've been protected all my life. These are things I found out through my own experience. Okay. I go to the church and I'm struggling to pray. I'm struggling to pray. And can't get anywhere. So I go to the door, get ready to leave. The Holy Spirit says, you go back in, Greg, and you pray. I want you to pray in the Holy Spirit. So I began to pray in my prayer language. And this went on, and suddenly there was a release and a release and a release and a release. And so I told the Lord, I've got to be able to duplicate this. I've got to be able to duplicate this. Why do I feel better? Explain to me, Holy Spirit, why I feel better. And so this thought came to my mind. Okay, when you're praying in tongues, you're speaking to men directly, and you're speaking to God, not to men. And in your spirit, you're speaking mysteries. And so Holy Spirit says, you know what a mystery is? I said, yeah. It's a whodunit. I'll figure it out sometime. No, go look up the word mystery. So I went up to look to the word mystery in the Greek Expository Dictionary, New Testament words, and a definition totally changed my spiritual walk, because the word mystery comes from the Greek word mysterion, which means not as in the English, knowledge withheld, but contrary, knowledge revealed. It's revelation knowledge given to the believer in a time and a manner that is appointed by God. And so I begin to understand, if I wanted God's knowledge, God's revelation, God's wisdom, one of the means of God dispensing that is praying in my prayer language. I'm speaking revelation to myself. I'm speaking answers to myself. I'm speaking hope to myself. I'm edifying myself, and I'm building myself up. And so that became a big key for me to be able to overcome this, was because my spirit was being renewed as I was learning to take authority over my mind and the thought processes. My spirit was being renewed, and there was power flowing into my spirit.
Mm-hmm.
So you
Awesome.
got a awesome. Well, sure.
Even so, your life got to the point to where, according to everything that looked like on the outside, within hours or days, your life is going to end.
Right.
You got to
Right.
that point.
I couldn't. That was hard. That's difficult. That was very, very difficult for me. Okay, I didn't think it was fair. I'll just be honest with you. I didn't think it was fair.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been a preacher for, at that time, 25 years, pastor of a church, always done whatever the Holy Spirit wanted me to do. I'm an Assembly of God preacher. This kind of stuff's not supposed to happen to me.
Yeah.
I'm a good guy. I'm a good guy. I don't deserve this stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
Whatever. I had a very difficult time with that. I tell you, Brent, if anybody asked me when my breakthrough came, my breakthrough came one night as I was praying to the church. And I got to the point where I understood, listen, if I live, I'm God's. If I die, I'm God's.
Yeah.
Blessed be the name of the Lord. There is no downside in death. There's no downside in going on to be with the Lord. There's no downside with that. But here's something else. Moses contended with God.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't really understand the concept at that time. Moses contended with God many occasions as he dealt with the Israelite people. So Isaiah, prophet said, 40th chapter, I am he who forgives you your transgressions and will remember no more. Contend with me, state your case that you might be healed. Okay, so here's my case, Brent. All right, if you want to know my case, this is my case. I said, Lord, I have preached for 25 years that you're a healer, that you're a deliverer, and that you heal people. Now the devil gets to dangle me up in front of the area I'm in, and this community gets to watch me die little by little. Lord, this don't look good on you. This does not look good for you at all.
Yeah.
And I begin to contend, Lord, if you're going to heal me, then you do it for your own name's sake. You do it for your own glory. You do it to show these people you are who you say you are, and you do what you say you're going to do, instead of letting the devil dangle me up in front of people and watch me die little by little. Everybody knows my prognosis. Everybody in this little community knows. They're just sitting the clock waiting. Greg ain't going to be around much longer.
Yeah.
And so, Lord, would you turn this thing around, and would you glorify your name? Okay, that was on a Thursday. I was scheduled to go to the IU Medical Center to have a cystoscope ran to see if the 2 treatments of chemotherapy that I'd taken had any impact. So I go, I knew the oncologist quite well by this time. So I'm laying on the table thinking, okay, the tumors are going to be there like they have been in every test. And in fact, he would always want me to know if I wanted to turn on the camera where I could see the inside. He did. And I said, no, doc, I'm sure this chemo hadn't done any good at all. In fact, I would say that I was probably as faithless right at that moment as any time I've ever been in my life. And so he inserts the camera, and all at once I hear him say, oh, my. And of course, he knows he's a Boston Red Sox fan, and I'm a big Yankee fan. And so he says, Greg, he looks up, he says, you hit a home run the bottom of the 9th inning, the 7th game of the World Series with 2 outs and 2 strikes on you. He said, I cannot see any evidence of disease in your bladder at all.
Wow.
I can't see any evidence of any kind of disease
Yeah.
in your blood at all. He said, you have had some type of miraculous recovery. And Brent, I didn't even know how. I mean, I'm stunned.
Yeah.
Stunned. I wish I could sit here and tell you, oh, the great man of faith went in there believing, whatever. But I was just stunned. I wanted it over with.
Wow.
And so it was a miracle. I mean, that's the only, even the doctors said, this is a miracle. This is a miracle.
Yeah.
And every time for years, I go back and see the surgeon, he would look at me and he would say, Greg, you really shouldn't be here. You really shouldn't be here. And so I kind of thought, well, I'd taken 2 rounds of chemo, Brent. I thought, well, maybe it was a chemo. But a year later, I'm sitting in the oncologist's office, and this is, of all the things anybody ever said to me, this probably struck me as hard as anything that's ever hit me. There were 24 people in my clinical trial. I'm sorry, somebody's very persistently trying to reach me right now. And, I asked the oncologist, I said, how did my clinical trial, there was 25 of us, and there was a group in Kettering, there was a group at Johns Hopkins, there was all these various groups. And I said, how did my group do? And he said, well, not very good, Greg. I said, well, what do you mean not very good? We're a year out, how many survivors? And he put his head down and said, 1. You're the only survivor of the 24. And I didn't know how to handle that. I did, like somebody hit me in the face with a frying pan.
Yeah.
I don't know how to handle that.
Yeah.
I don't know how to handle that.
Yeah.
24 people taking the same regimen of drugs, and a year later, I'm the only one alive.
Yeah.
And so if I knew a formula, Brent, I'd go on television and sell it for $19.99.
Yeah. Sure.
But I don't know. I don't know all the ways the sovereign God moves, but I can tell you this. Tammy's testimony. I know my testimony. Mm-hmm. I can only speak what God has done for me. Yeah. And God somehow, in some wonderful way, reached down from heaven and took care of all the cancers in my body. And for the last 25 years, I have gone, I still go once a year, for a test. And I have not had one reoccurrence of cancer in 25 years.
Yeah. Yeah. The hope that's there says that we have a tendency to believe the doctors, the technology, the medications.
Absolutely. Right.
And we fail to believe that there's still a God.
Right.
As Jesus walked this earth and Jesus healed over and over and over again, that same Jesus is still doing the same thing. And we have hope. Like you said, you gave your life to the Lord, so you have hope for eternity. So no matter which way it goes, you're fine.
Right.
But the evidence of God in your life is unquestionably God moved, and that is the only reason that you're here today.
Absolutely.
And your story, which is actually told in your book called Survivor, your story has really helped a lot of people, because when they hear the word cancer, or if it's another word, whatever it is that people say, wow, this is overwhelming to me. I don't know what to do. It's bigger than I am, or the doctors don't know what to do. You and I can tell people hope is not all gone yet.
Absolutely. I'll say this, Brent. These 3 things about faith, hope, and love, I didn't really realize how important hope was, because faith is the substance of the things we hope for.
Yeah.
In other words, without hope, faith has nothing to draw from. Faith has nothing to pull out.
Yeah.
And the enemy's after your hope.
Yeah.
We like to talk a lot about faith, and I'm all about faith as well. But if we lose our hope, faith has nothing to draw from, and the enemy is after your hope.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so if there's nothing else I can do to the people who are watching this today, the reason why I called the book Survivor is because my oncologist, a number of years out, sitting in his office, he said, Greg, he said, your scans look fine today. And he said, there's a 32-year-old nurse. She's taking her first round of chemo. She has the same prognosis that you had, and she's scared to death. And he said, would you go see her and talk to her? He said, you don't know her. He said, but it doesn't matter. All she needs to see is a survivor.
Yeah.
And that just really hit me.
Yeah.
It's really hit. People need to see a survivor. They need, because it brings hope.
Right.
I tell you, Dodie Osteen's book, I cannot tell you how it helped me. It healed a cancer. I sit down and I read that book and I wept and I wept and I wept because she had no hope at all. I mean, she had no hope at all. And yet God healed her. And I thought, Lord, if you healed her, you can heal me.
Yeah.
And I thought, one day, somebody's going to be sitting in a chair like I am, overwhelmed with despair, and they're going to be reading my story.
Yeah.
And that was the motivation for writing that book, because of what her book did for me and how it helped.
And that's why I wanted to interview you. And that's why I want to put your story online, because this is the modern day book that's going out via video and could end up anywhere. And we trust it'll end up in the on the computer screen, on the phone screen of someone who watches, listens,
Right.
and God brings hope to them. And
Right.
I just say to anyone today, if that's you, and there's any way we can do to pray for you, please contact us. We're on the Facebook page as well as YouTube page. If you'd like to get a copy of this book here, we have multiple copies that we've gotten from the author, and we can definitely send those to you as well. We will do all that we can. Pastor Greg is in extreme southern Indiana, and I'm sure be glad to be a blessing and pray for anyone as well down there also. Pastor Greg, I just want to thank you for taking the time today. This is very important for people to hear. People need hope, and your story helps to give that.
It's been a pleasure being with you, Brent.
Thank you so much.
All right. God bless you.
This has been brought to you by Delphi First Assembly of God and Kokomo Southview Church. To contact us or send us your prayer request, testimony of answered prayer, or Bible questions, please see the information on the screen. May God's salvation through Jesus Christ overflow into your life with His joy. God bless until we see you again.